Hi, Mary.
Hello.
Did you send Chris the invite to join this meeting?
I did forward the invitation to Chris, yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, folks, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? I think we're good. All right. I'd like to call the Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Committee meeting to order. It is 2 o'clock, so thank you all again for being here. This has been a lot of work, and we're glad to see everyone's faces joining us today. Again, my name is Brent Wallace, Chancellor, North Central Texas College District, and I'm serving as the committee chair. Be advised that today's meeting is being broadcast publicly and recorded. So before we begin, I'd like to remind ourselves of our rules of engagement, so to speak, we've been having in our meetings. That being, please be sure to state your name if you could before you speak, just in case someone doesn't see our names. Mute your device when you're not speaking is best for broadcast, and then we'll try to all keep our background noise to a minimum as best we can. Item number 2 for our agenda is to call the roll, and I'm going to ask Ms. Burks if she would to do that for us at this time.
Yes. Mr. Tex Buckholtz. Mr. Richard Cervantes.
Here.
Ms. Terry Crawford.
Here.
Ms. Mary Elizondo. Mr. Raul Garcia.
Here.
Mr. Jonathan Hoekstra.
Present.
Mr. Patrick Lee.
Here.
Dr. Cesar Maldonado indicated he would miss today's meeting. Dr. Jesus Rodriguez.
Present.
Ms. Mary Wickland.
Present.
And Mr. Jim Yiannopoulos. A quorum is present.
Marie, this is Mary Elizondo. I'm present also.
And I believe that that Tex is also joined us, so we'll make sure he's counted as well. Thank you, Mary and Tex. Perfect. We've established a quorum, so we'll move on to item 3, which is consideration of approval of the minutes from the meeting held on our last meeting on October 27th, 2021. A draft of those minutes were included in your agenda materials. Do I have any comments, questions, or any kind of corrections you'd like to make to the draft? And if so, we'll hear those now, but if not, we will entertain a motion to approve as presented.
Mr. Chairman, this is Richard Cervantes. I have a comment on page 2, the very last sentence. And just a point of clarification. We have some language there that we had requested that the non-critical awards achievement weight of that had been moved down to 1.2 be restored to 2. And it may be that everybody knows this but me, but when I see that they reduced it down for what is such a critical part of what institutions do, I think it might be of some value to provide further clarification. And so I would like to add after the word achievement, if folks don't object, that we would add in parentheses a degree, a certificate, or core curriculum completer in parentheses. And my logic, sir, is just that it still is befuddles me why that was taken down, and I think it may be communication, and so to the extent that we can enhance our communication, perhaps we won't fall into that trap again this time.
So would you like to present that as a motion in addition with the correction, Richard?
Yes, so moved.
Okay. We'll go ahead and entertain a second to that.
I'll entertain the second with the motion as amended.
Okay. So Dr. Rodriguez seconds that. Any further comments to that correction and or additional corrections or comments to be made? Hearing none, all those that are in favor, if you just signify by raising your hand, might be a good way for us to do that, please. Looks like we're unanimously. Any opposed? Then we approve unanimously. Thank you all. And thank you, Richard, for pointing that out. I think that's a great addition, honestly, just to make sure we keep clarification there. Perfect. All right. Our next agenda is the discussion of our charges that, from the commissioner to the committee. And so we'll begin with each of our groups. Charge 1 is to study and make recommendations for appropriate funding levels for contact hour, core, and student success funding. So Mr. Cervantes, any further updates, or is the work group ready to move forward on any particular? Just we'll let you do a little update for us if you would, sir.
Thank you. No, there are no further updates. The draft recommendations that we made at the last meeting still stand, and we are awaiting other implications from the other charge groups that we will fold into our charge, but we've not heard those yet. So at this point, I think we're where we need to be in this charge.
Perfect. I appreciate that. So hearing that, and we've all sort of had that discussion along the way anyway, that we kind of, that the charge 1 really is for most of us is a way of, it handles a lot of the other discussions in it. So let's move to charge 2, which is study and make recommendations for the appropriate funding levels for operation and support space support formulas for state colleges. And I think Ms. Wicklund, you have been leading that group. If you'd like to give an update, or if you're prepared for your work group to make any kind of formal motions, we'll turn to you now.
Sure. Well, we have met multiple times, 3 times, and we have discussed, reviewed data that was gathered, and internally the committee made suggestions, for possible recommendations. And so, but now the work group is ready to make a recommendation to the advisory committee, and so Marie's going to share the document on the screen, so you can see what it's kind of, to listen to me talk. But anyway, just a few things to note. The recommendations are based on the following. Inflation is estimated with the Higher Education Price Index, which is consistent with the rest of the higher ed sectors. And this recommendation includes a proxy for prison contact hours that was necessary due to the cancellation of courses during the accounting period due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, the committee recommends increasing the funding to the state colleges formula for the 24-25 biennium to $101.6 million, which is an increase of $15.9 million, or 18.5%, as compared to the 22-23 biennium. The recommendation includes funding $84.9 million to the state college's instruction and administration formula, which would be an increase of $14.6 million, or 20.7%, compared to the $70.4 million appropriated for the 22-23 biennium. This funding level assumes an inflation-adjusted rate of $15.39 per contact hour. This is an increase of 98 cents, or 6.8%, compared to the $14.41 funded for the 22-23 biennium. This funding level also assumes a contact hour growth rate of 14.25% for the following reasons. Continued trend of explosive 25% growth in workforce development programs that has strengthened economic prosperity around Southeast Texas and statewide by intentionally aligning skills and tailoring short-term credentials to the needs and opportunities of our community and state. Bridge the existing training and educational credential gap between current jobs and new jobs being created to support community and statewide economy by developing new academic and technical programs. Expand services for our dual enrolled students, which has grown 231% in 5 years. Focus on advising, including career path development and tutoring, which are essential for completion. Develop and expand college readiness support services and resiliency training for at-risk students who arrive academically unprepared and at a disadvantage in navigating the post-secondary experience alone. and then to re-engage adult learners beyond the 25 to 34 years that have been displaced from the workplace and need reskilling and relevant training to support high-value careers. The recommendation also includes $16.7 million to the space support formula and small institute supplement. This would be an increase of $1.3 million when compared to the 22-23 biennium. This funding level assumes a rate of $5.84 per predicted square foot, representing an increase of 37 cents compared to the $5.47 funded in the 22-23 biennium. The funding level assumes a 3.2% increase for growth in predicted square feet between the fall of 2020 and the fall of 2022, and a 6.8% increase for inflation. We also recommend splitting the space support rate between utilities and operations and maintenance components using the fiscal year 22 utility rates, and updating the utility rate adjustment factors using the fiscal year 22 utilities expenditures, and allocate the space support formula using the fall 22 predicted square feet. And then we recommend to fund the small institute supplement using the same methodology used in the 22-23 biennium, and include an additional $0.54 million for inflation. So this concludes Charge 2's recommendation to the Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Committee for the 24-25 biennial appropriations.
This new critical field.
I'd be glad to answer any questions about what we discussed.
So I remind members to be sure during, if you're not commenting, to make sure you're muted. Mary, are you presenting that as a motion from the committee as well as your recommendations?
Is that what I need to do?
I think that's an easy way to do it. And then what I thought we'd do is entertain a second and then go into discussion further. Since the work group has done that, we can always alter that after that with no opposition from the group. I think that's an easy way to handle these. So Ms. Wickland is presenting that as a motion from the work group, and she making that motion. Do I have a second?
I'll give you a second.
Second from Tex. Now, further discussion, questions, folks, or anything that there can be for clarification, further discussion on the recommendations from the work group. Just on a comment from me, I think that there's a good alignment with you using the higher education index inflation rate rather than other traditional inflation rate. We saw work group 1 last time speaking to that for operations for the community college, formula fund. So I think that's a good place to be. Questions, ladies and gentlemen, any? Hearing none, what I would like to do, because of the formality of this and because we're not in person, and please bear with me, I would like Mary to call roll again and take an official vote on these items. I know that takes a little extra time, but it just makes it clear that everybody has an opportunity to make sure that their votes are heard. So Ms. Burks, would you mind doing that for us again? And we'll call for the vote on recommendation to Charge 2.
Dr. Wallace,
Yes.
just for clarity, once we make a vote, hypothetically speaking, if something else comes up, will we suggest additional changes, or this is locked and loaded?
No, this would finalize this particular charge in this case. That's why you did see Charge 1 kind of put on pause. There are a couple of charges, in my opinion, stand sort of alone, and this is one. The TSTC model we'll discuss in a moment sort of stands on its own as well, but that's why you did see us hold off on making formal recommendations Charge 1 yet. But
Got it. Thank you.
you're welcome. Marie, do you mind calling the roll, please?
Sure. Yes, please indicate your vote as I call your name. Mr. Tex Buckholtz,
Aye.
Mr. Richard Cervantes,
Yes.
Ms. Terry Crawford,
Yes.
Ms. Mary Elizondo,
Yes.
Mr. Raul Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Jonathan Hoekstra,
Yes.
Mr. Patrick Lee,
Yes.
Dr. Jesus Rodriguez,
Aye.
Ms. Mary Wickland,
Yes.
and Dr. Brent Wallace.
Yes. All right, thank you. I think that's all our members present today. And Mary, please, to you and your work group, what great work, and thank you so much. It's nice to have one of our charges completed. That's how this kind of works nicely. So we appreciate that so much, and congratulations to your group for completing that charge for us. And that charge does pass for the matter of the minutes. It's passed unanimously by those in attendance today. Well, now, yes,
I would like to thank the work group.
please.
They, we all had to adjust our schedules to meet, and everyone met every time. So it was a great work group. So I enjoyed working with them.
Thank you. Great job. All right, moving on to charge 3, which is to study and make recommendations for the appropriate funding level 4 and the refinement of the Texas State Technical College System's return of value funding formula. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Hostra, who has chaired that work group, and let him provide an update and possible next steps for us.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Wallace. I'll make some contextual comments about what we have ready to go. I believe the Charge 3 Task Committee is ready with a recommendation, but I'll welcome conversation as we get to that point in the process. We did take a deep dive into several areas affecting our different areas of our funding formulas, and that required quite a bit of work on behalf of the coordinating board staff, and so I want to express my gratitude to them. I think every piece of our funding formula, they went back and dug up more analysis for us, and so thank you so much. And so I think, Marie, do you have a document you're ready to share? I'll just give some highlights with respect to the table here, and then if it pleases the chair, I'll read off the recommendation so that for transparency's sake. And so that top row really highlights the overall funding, and the overall funding is indicating, or the recommendation is at a 7.5% increase, a $13 million change, raising TSDC's total funding to $186.9 million. On the administrative and instruction and space support, there's 2 formulas embedded in that GR amount. And so there's the return value funding formula and the space support funding formula. So the charge asks the committee to look at the appropriate funding level for and the refinement of the return value funding formula. And there is a refinement offered in this recommendation. The $168.8 million recommended appropriation includes an additional amount of return value related to students earning workforce continuing education hours. And so the coordinating board staff did run the return value associated with those students, and it returned an additional $30 million of value, resulting in almost $11 million of additional funding, and that's noted there in the comments. And so that's the refinement that is suggested in response to the charge. There's additional on the space support. We did additional work. We had some concern, us as an institution, and again, the co-board produced quite a bit of analysis, really mitigating some of our concerns relating back to a previous study. And so at this point, there is no refinement suggested to the space support, and so it's consistent with the space support model that was developed for both the general academic institutions and the state colleges. And so I think the one revision to what we've historically seen was the application of the higher ed price index to that formula as well. Going down into the document, the next table shows the small institution supplement. There's no refinements to that formula either, except for the application of the higher ed price index to maintain continuity with what the other institutions are doing. And then lastly, we did make some changes to the dual credit funding recommendation. And we actually took a look at the funding rate for dual credit. And this has kind of been a story getting to the methodology we've gotten to in terms of funding. And we actually recommended a reduction to really honor the recommendation that occurred 2 years ago. And so this funding rate actually gets us closer to the spirit in which TSCC recommended we have a funding level that's closer akin to what the community colleges are doing. So there's about a $600,000 reduction in funding as a result, which is about a 26% change. So with that, I'll read through the recommendation. It's the working group 3 or charge 3 work groups recommendation that they fund $178.8 million in general revenue and $186.9 million in all funds for the 2024-2025 biennium, an increase of $13 million or 7.5%, which includes $8.1 million of general revenue dedicated. In addition, that would include funding $168.8 million in general revenue and $176.9 million in all funds to the Texas State Technical College System return value for an increase of $13.1 million or 7.9% compared to the all funds appropriation of $163.8 million for the 2022-2023 biennium. Estimated $8.1 million in general revenue dedicated, which is equal to the amount appropriated in the administration and instruction and space support formulas for the 2022-2023 biennium. The $151.4 million general revenue recommendation for the return value funds 35.9% of the $421.8 million estimated 2014-2015 cohort, which is the same percentage of return value that was funded for the 2022-2023 biennium general revenue appropriation, but includes return value for workforce continuing education programs of 144 contact hours or more. In addition, it includes $1.6 million in general revenue for dual credit contact hours for the 2022-2023 biennium, a decrease of $0.6 million or 26.1%, negative 26.1% from the current biennium. And lastly, we recommend funding $8.4 million to the small institution supplement, applying an inflationary increase to the 2022-2023 biennium rate.
Okay, so Jonathan, we can do similar to what we do with Mary. If you would like to make that the recommendation from the committee, we can entertain a second and then have some discussion if that's what you would like to do.
Yes, sir. I'll make that motion.
Okay, do I have a second? Terry, it indicates with a raised hand. Now, any discussion? One question just to make sure we're kind of clear, Jonathan, the $186.9 million is the overall, and maybe Mary, if we could go back up to that, that's perfect. We're looking at really what you all are considering is an increase of 8.4 in the administrative instructional space support and a reduction of 26% in change for the dual credit contact hour. That's really the overall major shift, except for the overall dollar that equates to a percent change of 7.5 for the sector at the top, correct? Yes. Am I right there?
Yeah, it's all inclusive. Yes,
it's all inclusive. Okay. I just want to make sure sometimes that gets all complicated to members that aren't familiar with TSTC's funding model, that's all within basically the top portion are inclusive to the total funding. So
Yes, sir. There's general revenue, which is our appropriation, and then the general revenue dedicated
right.
includes, the statutory tuition. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, I'm going to do the same thing again. I know this is a little more complicated, but I think it's good practice to let us call roll for these important recommendations. So Ms. Burks is going to call a roll for a vote.
Mr. Texas Buckholz,
Aye.
So,
Mr. Richard Cervantes,
Yes.
Ms. Terry Crawford,
Yes.
Ms. Mary Elizondo,
Yes.
Mr. Raul Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Jonathan Hoekstra,
Yes.
Mr. Patrick Lee,
Yes.
Dr. Jesus Rodriguez.
with all due respect, I'm going to abstain on this one. I just want a little bit more time to review it before I cast the vote.
Sure. Dr. Brent Wallace
Yes.
and Ms. Mary Wicklund.
Yes.
Thank you.
So that would pass with the majority of yes and one abstention. So we can know that for that, Dr. Rodriguez, so there's no problem with that. Perfect. All right, moving on to charge 4 in my order here. Got to get back to my script. Charge 4 is to institute a formal process for the committee to recommend critical fields for inclusion or removal for success points based on the best available data and trends about regional and state workforce needs. Using this form of methodology and the most recently available data, develop recommendations for 2 sets of fields to the coordinating board. 1 set of fields recommended for addition to the critical fields list and 1 set recommended for removal from the critical fields list. Dr. Rodriguez has been working with that work group. So any update or any kind of information you'd like us to consider today, Dr. Jesus?
Yes. I just want to start that this challenge has been pretty challenging. This charge has been pretty challenging, and it's been a very tedious journey to say the least. Coming up with this process, I think the concept is simple. Achieving it is the challenging part in the tedious process. So from the point of departure is what databases are there available? Which ones can we use? How can we correlate all this where it makes sense to us, to the association, to the coordinating board? And I've been working individually with the members of the committee, brought it up to the association. And at this point, we're just going to present where we're currently at. We created a process that is transparent using all public databases where we can replicate what we come up with. So the first step that you will see is the process, the databases that we use, the process of how we ended up to where we're at. That's the first part or the first component of what we're doing. And I'd like some feedback on that one. Then the second is how we determine the statewide needs, and then how we determine the regional needs. So it's we ran a couple scenarios and we worked it out with the Tech Association as well as the coordinating board. And at this point, with your permission, Dr. Wallace, I'd like to turn it over to Chris. He's got the databases and the process, so he can walk us through the process for the members to see it and hopefully provide me with some feedback.
For coordinating board staff, we have no problem, I assume, with a TAC representative providing data update. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so Chris, the floor is yours for presentation, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. So as Dr. Rodriguez alluded, one of the key considerations here was to start with publicly available data, and something that was transparent and could be replicated with basic tools by someone with just a very basic set of skills. So what we've done so far is engage with staff from the Workforce Commission, Texas Workforce Commission, and explore their data resources. And they expressed a great deal of confidence that the data that they provide, perhaps with some tweaks, but in largely its current form, would be an appropriate basis for assessing critical fields on a regional basis. And so they provide at the workforce region level, the workforce development area, as it's known, a set of labor force projections by occupation projected out. There is a lag, a 2-year lag, but the projection focuses on long-term trends and extends out to 2028 at this point. And so I'm going to share screen. I hope this isn't too rough and hard to follow, but I'm just going to talk us through it at a relatively high level, the process that we're looking at so far. So this is the result of joining the Workforce Commission's data that I just talked about at the workforce development area level, with a crosswalk from the Department of Education that links SOC codes, which are occupation codes, at a detailed level to 6-digit zip codes. So very detailed academic field codes that you can see here in this column. Now, what we also have from the Workforce Commission data is a typical education required for entry here in this column, and a wage associated, an average mean wage associated with that occupation specific to that region. And so what all of this combined allows us to do is create a data set at the zip code level. We do a weighted average for the wage. So we have a SIP level wage, if you will, so that we can establish a threshold there, which in this sample, which is sort of a proof of concept, if you will, we make a cut at the most recent Texas individual median wage, which the Workforce Commission reports as about $39,600. And so we're making that cut. And then we are able to, by joining workforce development areas to higher education regions, which involves no splits, thankfully, we can sort of sum that data up to the higher education region level. Now, one sort of wrinkle in this is that multiple SIPs can feed a single occupation. So there's a double counting issue involved. So you can see over here on the far left that a lot of occupation codes are repeated. That's because you need sort of a separate entry for each pairing of an occupation code with a SIP code. So later on, we're having to sort of count those duplications and then deflate the figures. So that's one among a few technical issues that have yet to be ironed out by myself and staff with the committee, of course. But what we're doing here in this sort of sample run is summing to the 4-digit SIP code, which we see as an appropriate level of detail, summing up the current employment or current as of 2018, and I believe that we can discuss with Workforce Commission about getting 2020 data in there, but with their current publicly available downloads, this is what we have. So what we're looking at is, in this sum of jobs total, we're looking at the combination of the growth expected to occur for that occupation in that higher education region, combined with the openings that are expected to occur on an annual basis between now and 2028. So new jobs or job openings that our graduates would be filling come not only from growth in that occupation, but also from current workers transferring to other occupations or exiting the workforce. So we want to combine those into a sum so what we're looking at here is, for example, in the Central Texas Higher Education region for the 4-digit SIP 1.02, the Workforce Commission projects that occupations associated with that SIP, according to the Department of Education's crosswalk, that group of occupations will have 34 total openings, and there's a decimal because of the deflation procedure I referenced earlier, but about 34 total openings between now and 2028. Not a lot, but keep in mind that's just one 4-digit SIP in one region. So then what we're doing is breaking that out among the regions and sorting that by most job growth to least job growth. Another one of the wrinkles we have yet to iron out is that the department's crosswalk associates some occupations with a 2-digit SIP as opposed to a 6-digit SIP. And so you have some replication essentially, but we'll figure out how to determine which SIPs should be rolled up to the 2-digit level and which should be kept at the 4-digit level. So here you see 51. Central Texas has 300 projected openings that are crosswalked to the 51 general SIP, which is just general allied health. But then we also see a great many openings that are crosswalked to a more specific SIP, 4-digit SIP within allied health. So as I said, one of the technical issues to be worked out, but we are, in this example, we are making a cut at the top 25 SIP codes. And then just to analyze the extent of overlap between the regions, the SIPs generated for each region. So what this is doing here is in column B, we're looking at a list of all of the SIPs that appear on any region's top 25, unduplicating that. And that is, I think, in the mid 50s, I believe. So 50, 55 SIP codes, again, before we work out this 2-digit versus 4-digit issue, 50 to 55 SIP codes are necessary to capture every region's top 25. But then we're looking at the extent of overlap. So sorted here by the number of regions in which a SIP code appears. The 49.02, which is ground transportation, that appears for every region, as does the 51.08, 47.01, et cetera. And then what we've discussed so far is establishing a threshold, say, for example, the 8 of 10 regions, so all of these SIPs, and establishing that threshold as saying, if a SIP appears on the top list for 8 of 10 regions or 7 of 10, there's certainly some room for discussion, then that would comprise a statewide critical field list. And then each region, through a process that also would need to be determined, would have the flexibility to add fields to that list that would sort of meet either their own understanding of fields that are emerging or things that are more specific to that region. So, for example, they could be allowed to add 2 SIP codes, probably 4-digit SIP codes, to their own top fields, critical fields list that they would be funded on for success points. So we've also done a little bit of looking at, and I apologize for how rough this is, but a little bit of looking at, depending on where you draw that threshold, you see the extent to which here, in this case, the extent to which each region's top 3 highest projected demand SIP codes would be represented on the statewide list. So in this example, if you do 8 of 10, if you construct your statewide list from those that appear on 8 of 10 regions, then 3 regions would only see one of their top 3 SIPs represented. 4 regions would see 2 of their SIPs represented. The other 3 regions would see all 3 of theirs in the statewide list, so would not have to use their sort of flexible slots to fill in those top 3. If you drop it down to 7 of 10, then as you'd expect, you see more regions whose top 3 SIPs would be represented already on the statewide list. So that's another area where the committee's input would be helpful about sort of what is the appropriate threshold for constructing a statewide list based on this or similar methodology. I'm going to stop sharing there and welcome the committee's questions, or otherwise turn it over to Dr. Rodriguez.
Dr. Rodriguez, I think we've got a few questions perhaps for Chris's data. Do you mind if we interject those at this point, or do you have a little bit you'd like to say beforehand?
Again, yeah, we welcome the feedback here. It's establishing a process to see if we can identify the more correct critical fields based on data-driven data. So this is the process that we created. You can see that there's a statewide need. It would draw it at 8 or 7 regions that do meet that need. That's a statewide, and then the critical needs on the regional side. So we're trying to, through the same process, be able to identify statewide needs and also some sort of regional needs. And yeah, definitely we'll open it up for any feedback.
Sure. Raul, I know that you may have a question, Mr. Vice Chair Garcia.
Yes, thank you. Hey, first of all, very impressive body of work. You know, you can tell just by the information itself, the complexity of this. And so, you know, if you make a recommendation today, I realize that we are definitely in the right pathway. And so great work. But I sort of followed your framework because I did the same body of work just for my personal interest. And so I just wanted to identify a couple of things that I thought may add to probably some additional questions. So going back to the body of work, specifically your data source, where it identifies the different, and I think the labeling is type of education needed, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we pull that data up, I think it's going to identify 4 or 5 different categories. One is post-secondary with no degree. So there's different categories in there. One of them being a bachelor's degree. So the question that I have for this committee is, how will this framework be structured? Whether or not it's going to be inclusive, it's going to factor in all those occupations that is focused on bachelor's degree. And I ask that because our role, I think, is once we get them to an associate's degree, there's a handoff to a 4-year institution. So in your body of work, my question number 1, does it include those occupations that requires a bachelor's degree? And if the answer is yes, then the question is, should it be in there? Only because it could skew the data. Now, what does that mean? You may have some occupations that requires a bachelor's degree, and that may be your top 10 occupations. And then it just pushes everything else where we're, I believe, responsible for educating a workforce up to an associate's degree. So that's my question. Number 1 is there a cutoff in the perimeter of educational needs for occupation? Number 2, I think one of the things that's been a common discussion was, how do we account between a metropolitan area and a rural? And so the data that you have breaks it down by region. And I think that information gets skewed a little bit because you may have some higher numbers at a metropolitan area that may skew and not factor in the rural piece. Now, I will say, I believe the same source where you're getting your information, you will find a file, and that file is referred to as Rural Capital Area WDA Industry. which focuses just on the rural community. And when I compare the two, the metropolitan and the Texas-wide, I'm sorry, the Texas-wide occupational needs and the rural, they really come close. There's a few things that are different, but not much. But you know, just food for thought as you start developing this framework. There is another file out there that is the rural capital area WDA industry, and that's under the rural capital LAUS current filing is the name. May want to look into that file a little bit more. What else? So yeah, very impressive how you were able to bridge the occupational code to the SIP code, and how you did that, how you merged the information, very impressive. You know, doing an Excel with a VLOOKUP, that you know, it has its challenges, right? But and then my last piece is, so going back to the scaling. So once we identify all the occupations, whether it's post-secondary through associate or post-secondary through bachelor's degree, it sounds like you were going to design another parameter to say, we're going to pick maybe the top 10 or maybe the top 30 occupational items. I think that's a great idea. Because otherwise, if you start doing the 100%, it just becomes more complicated. Last comment, sorry about this, is how often is the occupational list updated, right? Because then the question is, how often are we going to update our information? Is it going to be every 5 years or every 2 years? Just food for thought. You know, obviously, you know, during an economic crisis, that number of information is going to change drastically, I would think. So maybe it's every 5 years, with the caveat that maybe in an economic downturn, big changes occur. Maybe we take that into consideration, accelerate an update to this modeling. Just food for thought. That's all I have. Thanks.
Roberto, did you want to make some, and other questions, please let us know, folks.
Again, it is a tedious journey trying to come up with a process that makes sense, that's logical, that's transparent, and that can be replicated. So thank you, Raul, for this feedback. Appreciate it. I want to get the information here so I can call another meeting with the committee and continue to kick the ideas around. But right now, we're thinking every 4 years will be updated, every other biennium. So hypothetically speaking, if something does occur and we accept the process, we implement it on the 88 session, we'll keep it for the 89 as well, and then revisit it later time. Where we draw the line, it was not on the top 10 occupations. We were thinking more on the regions. If 8 of the regions have all these SIPs, then that is a state issue. So the question was, do we draw the line if we divide it into 10 regions? If 8 of the 10, 7 of the 10, 5 of the 5 regions, does that constitute a state need? So we were debating between 8 of the 10 or 7 of the 10 regions that all of them have these zip codes. That's a state need. So we draw the line on 7 of the 10 regions having all these zip codes. That's where we draw the line. It might be 10 of them, 2 of them, or 30 of them, but it's kind of that represents the state need. And then we run this process just for the regions, and then the regions will have a say in it. We still haven't developed the process. How would a region say, I want this, not that, right? But we're hoping, hypothetically speaking, let's say the top 5 zip codes in that region are addressed by the state need. Well, that's great. And if it's not, then we need to develop a process for the regions to have a say in it. I think the feedback that I got was the metropolitan areas will dominate, we just leave it. So where do we have the need for the state, and how do we identify the need for the region? And this is as far as we've been able to take it.
And
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Wallace.
No, go ahead, Chris, if you'd like to respond.
I was just going to respond to the first question about the credential cutoff. Yes, that data on typical credential required for entry, that is in the TWC data. I think it's sourced from a Bureau of Labor Statistics crosswalk originally. In this example, we are including only some college, no degree, sub-degree certificate, or the associate degree occupations. My interpretation of the policy intention, given that transfer is its own metric, I had interpreted that as fields that are critical given the value of the credential in and of itself. But I recognize, that's a policy discussion that could go otherwise.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? There's a lot to absorb. I would really appreciate Dr. Rodriguez, perhaps you and Chris could forward some of this through Marie to the committee as a whole to kind of look at some of this, even if it's the top view of some of the data, just to give us a little bit of time to absorb, because there's a lot of information in this. I applaud the work of the work group to get to this point, because we've all struggled on how to make it both a statewide but the regional. But I too offer some concerns about rural versus urban, and I concern myself often because I have both in my own campuses. I have urban and rural campuses, so it begins to be even where some of us share workforce boards or have more than one in which we work within given a campus. So I don't think you intended, Roberto, to have any kind of motion today anyway. I think you all are trying to still absorb that. So, but any questions for members of the committee or Dr. Rodriguez or Chris before?
Again, it's yes, no recommendation here. We put a lot of time and effort and sweat, and Ms. Birch looks at me funny, and so does Emily and Chris. But you know what? They're great work group. So really trying to make sense of it. So the feedback is truly appreciated. We can sum up what we're trying to do. I would like to meet with the committee first, kind of get their feedback, and then send it to the entire group before our next meeting. So next time we present in December, we kind of flush it out. But I was using this as a sounding board as we move forward.
No, and I think that's great. And from the committee's perspective, I think it's great to get this in front of us now as you're tweaking, because we may not have a question come to mind today, but as we look at it the next few weeks, it may go, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize, or have another additional question. So very good. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. And thank you, Roberto, for offering insight into where the committee is working toward. Any questions for the work group? So we're going to move on then from charge 4, leaving that as still being worked on and still not prepared for formal recommendation yet. But we really know that's a heavy lift that they're going through the data, and we'll return on our next meeting to see where we are at that point. That moves us to charge 5, which is the study and make recommendation on inclusion of qualified non-credit workforce continuing ed courses, post-secondary industry certifications, and other workforce credentials in student success point measures, implications to the existing formula methodologies as needed, and recommendations on any associated data or reporting course requirements or funding levels. It's my understanding that Dr. Maldonado could not be with us today. I think there is a report perhaps or an update to be given by one of our members of that work group. And I don't know if that's Raul or if that is Terry or one of you.
Hi, Dr. Wallace. This is Terry Crawford, and Dr. Maldonado did ask me to go ahead and present this to you all.
Okay.
This would be presented as a recommendation, so it would be a motion.
Okay.
So you can see from the document here that Marie has brought up that we have three main recommendations, and there's a part A and a part B to each recommendation. And then there's an appendix that kind of shows some historical information about from continuing education, what had been covered and what had not been covered. So in recommendation 1, the main thing is when we look at critical and non-critical fields and including continuing education skills awards, you will see that the main recommendation is that for occupational skills awards, that those do be included in the funding recommendation. I think, Marie, there's a different document that was sent out. Do you want me to share screen?
Yes, that's the one that I had received, but perhaps I did not receive the most.
Okay. Can you all see my screen here? This is what Dr. Maldonado had sent out after our group meeting, our Charge 5 meeting. So you'll see here the recommendations, 1A with critical fields at the 3.25 points, and then the non-critical fields. We had that at 1.2, but with Charge 1 group looking at moving that to 2.0, we are recommending that we stay in line with the recommendations of the full Formula Advisory Committee. So the critical fields and these occupational skills awards, it would be to, yes, do include them. And you can see here that would be in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or allied health, and adding those as in with the critical fields. And then the non-critical fields, again, science, technology, engineering, and math, or allied health that are not considered a critical field would be at the 2 points. And that again would be for the occupational skills award. So there would be an award that goes with it that would drive the success point. On recommendation number 2, including continuing education hours in attainment metrics. And so this would be after we have success points already for the first 15 credit hours and the first 30 credit hours. And so putting that into a continuing education CEU unit, we looked at this being 24 and 48 hours, and you can see here the 1 point and the 1.5 points. And then on recommendation number 3, this is really on reporting and on requiring reporting. Part of the problem that the coordinating board has expressed as difficult to put any kind of dollar figure around is that this is reported in some places and not in other because there hasn't been funding attached to it. There hasn't been a reason for colleges to report this data. And so this recommendation number 3 is that we do need to report the data so that we can generate reports on it and see what we have. But the additional funding, the estimate of what we're seeing so far from what Marie, some spreadsheets Marie has put together would be an additional 7.9 million. Our recommendation is that is not a different way to slice the pie, but that in fact it is actually additional funding. And I'm going to go ahead and call on Raul. Did I miss anything, Raul? Is there anything you wanted to add to what has been presented here?
No, ma'am, I think you did an exceptional job. Thank you.
So for purposes, Terry, of moving us to conversation, you've presented this as a motion. Do I have a second?
I second that motion.
Okay, from Dr. Rodriguez. Now, any further discussion? A couple of questions, Terry, perhaps that for clarification's sake. The Occupational Skills Awards are traditionally CE, but are there not institutions that use CTE credits for occupational skills, but they just haven't been awarded credit for success points? For example, you might use inventory courses out of WECM for those courses, but because they didn't meet a threshold of hours, they weren't qualified previously, where this would make them qualified either in that case, correct? Am I following that right?
I believe so. Marie and Raul, you can correct me if I'm not understanding that correctly, but I believe that was what we did include in the recommendation.
Well, just as a member here, I think this is really important. I think the Occupational Skills Award are very workforce centric and are doing a very good job of putting our communities first in demand of what they need. And the challenge is those are oftentimes faster track, but very essential, and not being able to fund those in some way has been a challenge then. So from our standpoint, as far as what I see in our communities and all, that'll be a very, very helpful, especially in those areas identified, those critical field, health sciences, especially allied health. I think this is really a great step in the right direction. Other comments before we go to vote, or any questions before we go to vote? Quiet group. Good. All right, we have a first from Terry presented by the committee, and then we have a second from Roberto. We will now call roll on vote for Ms. Burks, if she'll call roll.
Mr. Tex Buckholz.
Sorry, can you restate that motion one more time?
The motion text on the is those recommendations that you just saw presented by work group 5, and those are we can pull those back up if the committee would need us to. But that is basically the recommendation. 1 is for critical field, non-critical field to have those as reflected, those occupational skills awards be fundable with 3.25 points and 2.0 points respectively. The recommendation 2 has to do specifically from first 15-hour, first 30-hour point matrix based on continuing ed CEUs. And then the 3rd is how we report that back to the coordinating board, because the funding would be a challenge, folks, if we don't have a report to follow. And it looks like you're recommending CBM 00M. So that is the recommendation. We adopt those under work group 5 charge.
Thank you. Yes, I'll vote yes for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Richard Cervantes,
Yes.
Ms. Terry Crawford,
Yes.
Ms. Mary Elizondo,
Yes.
Mr. Raul Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Jonathan Hoekstra,
Yes.
Mr. Patrick Lee,
Yes.
and Dr. Jesus Rodriguez,
Aye.
and Dr. Brent Wallace.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you. That motion then carries. We have gotten a lot of work done today, ladies and gentlemen, when you can get a few charges put to vote. And I'm very proud of that. Thank you for everyone's work on that. So what we have remaining are 2 that we kind of, when we began this work, knew would be maybe the last of what we would approve. And that is, of course, work group 1's our charge 1, which has to do with the appropriate funding levels for contact hour, core, and student success, and then further dissemination over the next few weeks as we look at the report Dr. Rodriguez provided, which is charge 4 to institute formal processes for critical fields or inclusion and removal of therefore. So I think we're in a very good place, honestly. But before we move too far, and let me just say this, thank you to coordinating board staff again. I think it's so important to say thank you to you ladies that are and your staff that are helping provide this data. We just can't do our work without this. And so again, to Emily and Marie, thank you, because this is heavy data collection, and you all have been great resources to this group, and we want to always be mindful of that. Our next meeting is scheduled, folks, for December the 8th. What I would like to do, though, is entertain a conversation briefly. That date is set, but if we would like to go ahead and tentatively schedule an additional December meeting to try to get full work completed before January, so we do not perhaps have to have that January meeting, But even if we did, that we would get one extra meeting in to see if we can do that. What I'm thinking, coordinating board staff, because these are live broadcasts, have provided dates of either the 14th, 15th, or 16th of December. So we're really looking at not a very long turnaround between the 8th meeting and those. But I think we may want to have those on your calendar tentatively. I'm thinking we have been typically a Wednesday sort of thing. If we wanted to look at the 15th at the same 2 o'clock hour and have that as a placeholder, that would be awesome. If we meet next week, or on the 8th, and we don't need that meeting, we can always cancel it. But if you would tentatively place the 15th at 2 o'clock on your calendars, and Marie will be sure to get that posted and sent to you, it wouldn't hurt, I don't think. And so that way we could even entertain one of those further recommendation or charges individually if we decided to just sort of do that. And that way we get another meeting in, hopefully, to maybe complete the work. Any objections to any of that? And we'll try to work to where we get everybody there. I think it's important. Okay. So still, next meeting, December 8th of 21. I do not like the fact that I cannot accept the fact we're at December of 21. I'm in denial of that because I thought this year would be much slower than it is. But if you're the rest of us, it's hard to believe it's December. But we sure appreciate you taking time. So again, if we did meet in January, we already have scheduled a January 5th. If we need it, that should be on your calendar by now at the same time on 2 o'clock. But if there are no further questions, again, I applaud those of you, every one of you have done such great work, and to be able to get some of our charges completed today helps us move that final report forward. And so thank you so much. If I hear no other questions or point of discussion, anything else? Hearing none, I would entertain then a motion for us to adjourn for the day. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, Roberto, I don't think by Robert's rules I need a second to adjourn, but do I have a second to adjourn? All right, Terry, thank you for taking one there for us. Terry seconds. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand. We're okay to adjourn. The Community and Technical Colleges Advisory Committee is now adjourned until December 8, 2021 at 2 o'clock p.m. And thank you all so